Hi, welcome to our Quarantine Studio Visit series. I'm Davana Robedee. I'm joined here today with Gary Sczerbaniewicz. Gary is a sculptor and installation artist living in Buffalo, New York. Gary is also our Best in Show winner for Made in New York this year. Thanks for joining us, Gary. Tell us a little bit about the piece that won Best in Show.
Thanks so much, Davana. It's an honor to be here with you, and it's an honor to obviously to receive the award for Best in Show. I think there's a lot of great work in the show from what I've seen. The piece in question is one of four architecturally situated vignettes from an installation that I call Kneel Before Zod. It's a piece I've shown twice so far in two different iterations, and in Alfred University, where I did my undergrad. I showed that in 2018, and then 2019 I was included in a biennial in the South Bend Museum of Art in South Bend. So the piece in Made in New York is a fourth edition. It's a sculptural vignette that I added in 2019 to the piece to round out the vignettes. And the piece is kind of a loosely retelling of the Apollo lunar missions. I'm very interested in alternative stories, alternative histories, alternative aspects of an already existing story. Like, we all know sort of a official history of the lunar missions, and Kneel Before Zod kind of plays with an alternate history based on multiple witness testimonies that have come up in my research. I began a sort of arc of research on this, the topic of this sort of high strangeness that I call high strangeness, I guess. Back in 2013, when I was at Sculpture Space, I was a resident artist there, and I was researching a piece on Homeland Security, and a piece called Tom Ridge. And in my researches, I kept watching YouTube videos and going down certain rabbit holes. And one of the rabbit holes was this sense of alternative histories, specifically of NASA, of the Apollo programs. And that always interested me as a child, growing up in the milieu where these guys were treated as heroes. The feat of landing on the moon is so absurd, you know, in terms of its daily sort of tangibility that we've kind of lost track with it. And being acquainted with these alternate stories, these stories of high strangeness, and in those I include UFOs, ufology, the paranormal, all kinds of fringe things that have interfaced with our daylit reality that we can't quite suss them out, but they're there still. And Kneel Before Zod and the piece in the show plays with that alternative reality. I included vignettes that were sort of splicing together two scenarios, and the one in Made in New York has this sort of a bedroom scene of a childhood bedroom from my childhood, growing up in the 70s and the 80s, being surrounded with images and magazines of Omni magazine. That was an omnipresent cultural thing at the time. And so there's this sort of portrait behind the bed that's oozing this sort of gelatinous material, and it's flowing all over the room, and it's sort of covered in lunar dust. And there's some portraits of Neil deGrasse Tyson and Neil Armstrong on one of the bed tables, and on the opposite bed table, there's this picture of Karl Wolfe, who was he was an Air Force sergeant who claimed to have witnessed back in the early 60s, when the lunar missions were just starting to map the moon. He claimed to be privy to photographic evidence of architecture on the backside of the moon, and nobody knew what the architecture was. And so I love that story, and it's kind of gone down that rabbit hole to create Kneel Before Zod. There are four, again, as I said, four different viewer scenarios. One in which the viewer is kneeling and looking into this long tube that contains two vignettes, one on each side. Another where the viewer sits in a cart and pulls himself into this sort of cockpit, and there's this lab vignette that goes off into the roof system of the architecture. And there's another one where the viewer leans at an angle that approximates Neil Armstrong leaving the lunar module. So it's a whole nebulous sort of mix of actual history and alternative history that kind of went into the piece.
So interesting. And one thing that I was looking at when I was looking at your work was how you attempt to disorient the viewer, and that you have sort of this dark undertone with the subject matter that's a little sci-fi-y, but this conspiratory nature. But then the pieces themselves are a little whimsical in the way that the viewer interacts with them, and that they're little tiny interiors. Can you talk a little bit about why you want to disorient the viewer, and what you've, because the viewer is incredibly important in how they approach your piece, and that's obviously something you've considered a lot. And how do you deal with that whimsical versus serious tone?
Well, I really, back at Alfred University, I took a class that included installation and performance art and theater and dance. And I got really seduced by the idea that art could be time-based, that it could be introduced to the viewer in a range of different possibilities. And that ignited just a career-long, so far, interest in bringing the viewer into a real-time interface. Often in museums, we can't, we have this sort of reverent attitude, like we're in a church or something. The art is revered, it's hanging on the wall. We're to speak in low tones. We're not to sort of, and I like doing that myself. But from my own work, I wanted to bring this theatrical element into it and bring this interactive. I wanted to put the viewer in a scenario that they almost have to sort of do a couple of things in order to get the viewer. And I kind of liken it to, I spent a long time in the Adirondacks growing up, and I liken it to a hike on a state park trail that's marked out, and, you're invited to go on the trail, but you can turn around at any point. But if you participate in the trail and you go to where it's leading you, there's going to be some sort of payoff vantage. And I really like that aspect of having this sort of, I'm not sure where I am, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do, but hopefully there's going to be something in the end that I'm being led to that is going to be something that the maker of the work has programmed for me, or has designed for my viewing. And I'm hoping that the viewer puts together both what they're being shown and how they're being shown it. Why am I asked as a viewer to crawl through a tunnel system or to kneel? Why am I being asked to do this absurd activity in order to look? And I want them to put together that physical posture and what is being shown, and that is the piece of work, right? That is the piece of work. And often there's audio tracks, or I use scent a lot in a series of these sort of pedestal pieces that I did called 7 Diminutive Incursions. I had viewers looking through pedestals at a similar type of architectural model that I built and constructed, like the one that's Made in New York. But I burnt the periscopes and I used pine tar. I wanted the scent to be present and the charred surface of the sculpture to be along with what they're viewing as a sort of synthesis of the concept that I want to communicate. So I don't know if that makes sense, but for me, there's something that happens in that disoriented state. There's some different communication. It's almost like if you think about certain things during the daytime, they have a different resonance as maybe if you're thinking about them at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? There's a quiet, there's a sort of, those things can inhabit different sorts of reality than they do in the daylit world. And so, yeah, even though a lot of the subject matter that I get into is along the lines of the uncanny or the weird and the eerie, the post-apocalyptic kind of interest that I have. A lot of people really enjoy the activity. Like, people will really get into, and I didn't anticipate this in the beginning. I thought, okay, that there's going to be a lot of conservative viewers that just don't think they're allowed to pull themselves on a cart, or, you know, or crawl through a tunnel system, or sit on a chair, or kneel on a kneeler. But I find that the art viewing crowd is very into that and very excited to be asked to do something a little different than they're normally doing in an art scenario. So that fascinates me. And I even though I build sculptures, more traditional sculptures, more architecturally based, there's something in that larger installation work that I do that really excites me. As an artist, we're fortunate. We can kind of work out our own psychological ontologies, you know, through our art. And that's a really fun thing to do and to be able to share with people.
You know, it's very interesting that you're coming from a place of these old school conspiracy theories that used to be really fringe, and the access to that information you'd get here, you'd get there. Maybe you'd read a book, maybe you'd see a message board where you had to go actually down the rabbit hole.
Oh, yes.
And
yes.
We're living in a society now where the conspiracy theories are much more available, coming from different directions in mass. And the notion of alternative history and alternative truths has suddenly become this flashpoint. Where do you see your work going in relationship to that? Or are you off in a different direction from that other reality that we're living in today?
It's a great question. I typically don't consider myself to be a conspiracy theorist, although I like looking at it as an alternative history, or an alternative, what if that didn't happen the way we think it happened? And, you know, as historians constantly revise and update our history, the way we think about people like Christopher Columbus, the way we think about the heroes of our nation, the fathers of our country, etc. There's always a sort of spin on that truth about whether who's currently in power, and whether who's currently deciding the sort of who are the academic, who are those academic forces today that decide how that truth gets tweaked and revised. And so growing up in the post-Watergate era, where government was completely mistrusted, and still look at the government we have now, my God. And do we know we're getting the truth? Do we know we're getting the official story? Probably not. It's up to our press to ferret this out. But speaking of the press, just last week, there's a New York Times article about the government researching and having, not only researching, but having materials from something that they call off-world. Who knows what the hell off-world means? But I think at the very least it means not us. So yeah, I'm following that rabbit hole. I feel like I have a couple of different trajectories in my work, and they're both moving in parallel directions. I'm working on schematic designs for an installation that I call Skiff. And we all know Skiff from the early Trump days, where Devin Nunes went into this secure. Skiff is a secure information facility. And so I'm working on designs for an installation that brings the viewer into this hyper concentrated sort of secure scenario in which they are, something is revealed to them, some truth is revealed to them. And to me, this harkens back to a lot of things for me. I grew up Roman Catholic. I always consider it the creative gift that keeps on giving. It's like a world of references where it's this notion of transformation based on revelation. And so I have an interest also in Scientology. It's just these bizarre things that we coexist with, and very smart people get involved in these situations, these alternate sort of realities. And I think for me, that's going to be it's a treasure trove of artistic sort of fodder to suss out and to play with. And I think so. And sort of another arc of my interest comes in these sort of architectural spaces that have been traumatized. So, having been in Buffalo for 20 years, we're privy to tons of 19th century houses and architecture, and I have internalized a lot of this, my surroundings here, and so I still kind of concurrently explore that arc of sort of ruined buildings, things that, you know, you may see a building with a collapsed wall of bricks that prevents access into the building. And so I'm playing with a lot of things like that on a parallel trajectory as with the installation work. So I typically work in my sketchbooks. I have a Moleskine sketchbook for, you know, it lasts me a few months. I rip through it. I become compelled by certain visions or certain ideas, and then I flesh them out into cardboard models, usually to figure out space and material. I work a lot with a laser cutter, but to answer your question, yes, this alternative history, this alternative sort of crossing of dimensions, I love that. I think we're at an age where there's a lot being questioned in physics and cosmology and ontology, and it's just an exciting place to dwell, and it fosters my imagination. And so, yeah, I think I'm going to be with it for a little while.
I find it very fascinating that you're working in that direction of alternate realities, so to speak. And my work is heavily influenced by the same themes and the same a different type of religious background. But I gave a lecture once about similar ideas, and I had someone come up to me specifically about a particularly transformative experience that happened, a personal experience that happened to me. And my question and what I pursue through my work is it real, or is it something my brain constructed for me? And you seem to also be going down this sort of middle line of, are these things true, and are they not? And my viewer really wanted me to choose, and I won't. And I think actually that would just kill the process. So do you confront that a lot with people who are conspiracy theorists who want you to jump on their boat of, yes, this is real, or people who are very rooted in, I guess, what they consider the real world, and who want you to jump on the boat of, no, none of this is true?
God, I love this question. Yeah, people want you to declare, and I think there is no joy in the declaration, since we can't know. What I wanted to say is I just finished a book called DMT, the Spirit Molecule, right, which posits that DMT, which is normally emitted from our pineal glands, creates these transformative states within us. And so many of the experiencers of these DMT, MD administered tests have similar experiences as those in the sort of alien abductee and those kind of trajectories. So there's some interface with what is clearly not us, what is clearly an other. And I love one of the scholars that I love to read, Terence McKenna. He was a self-described psychonaut who he and his brother were heavily into exploring psilocybin and ayahuasca and all of these sort of natural sort of means to tapping into those other dimensions. And once I was exposed to Terence McKenna, I could not subscribe to this whole nuts and bolts thing where people think UFOs are structured craft. Carl Jung thought about them. He thought they were sort of eruptions of the collective unconsciousness into this sort of physical state. So there's something clearly and patently absurd about the UFO abduction and the UFO experience that says it's not some straight nuts and bolts thing. There's a psychic quality to it. There's a disorienting quality. And I love that. And so because that brings us all into that realm of we don't have the answer. And I don't necessarily know that I'll ever get the answer. And I don't even care if I get the answer. It's more the search for it. It's more the sort of like a treasure hunt where we're kind of roaming the landscape, picking up pieces of what we think is, what we think makes sense to us at the time. I've had I've had run-ins with a very self-described skeptical person in the Buffalo art community, and we've had wonderful run-ins. But I think they're not as skeptical as they think. I think there are a lot of people that are programmed to believe because it can't happen, it doesn't happen. And I'm not of that mindset. I believe in the possibility, and I think as artists, we should have open minds to any experience, right? And so this is just one of a range of those many experiences that I think it's best to keep an open mind, and it's best not to declare for, House Stark or House Lannister at this point. I'm gonna wait this one out a little.
It's always interesting to find other people who are looking at reality and there are lots of different ways it can manifest, and it's very cool.
Yeah, if you follow certain rabbit holes on YouTube, and I love that, even TED Talks, right? You got physicists and cosmologists talking about simulation theory, talking about multiple universes. Even NASA declared, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, that they discovered a universe which works in reverse time-wise, right? So, it's exciting. And I think, the place for artists to be is not set in stone, purveyors of unassailable truth. I think it's our job. Well, it's my job for sure. I'm not going to dictate any other artist's job, but it's my job to question and to play with those questions. I love it. I revel in it, and it's a joy to be able to do. I mean, to be an artist in general in the United States is a rare ability, right? And we're very fortunate to be able to do what we do, and it's hard. It's really hard. Make life sacrifices, and if you're making life sacrifices and you're not doing what's coming through, that's not exactly, I think, the best way to live. So I think as an artist, you got to be responsive to what's coming through, what rabbit holes you want to follow, not even caring about what the repercussions would be. Because there are major artists that I follow, Trevor Paglen, Tony Oursler, a lot of people that are questioning the sort of official truths and the sort of this kind of fringe element. And I feel like I'm in good company in that sense.
Well, if you guys want to learn a little bit more about Gary and his work, check out his website, and definitely come by Made New York to see his piece. We're open until September 26th, which is a Saturday. So you can reserve an appointment by giving us a phone call. We do accept walk-ins, but we are limited to 20 people in the gallery at a time. So if we are at capacity, you may have to wait. But the best way to visit us is to just give us a call. Thank you so much, Gary, and I hope you have a great day.